So maybe, Madhavi, you should try. We just have 5 minutes left.
Yes, Hemaji, I'm just trying.
So there must be some trick with your audio, Sunita.
Yes, ma'am. I'm just trying. I don't know why it is not.
Yeah, I know sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, please click on the share sound, share computer sounds, then you will get the audio.
Is it audible, Sunita?
Yes, yes, got it.
जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा अवतीत ध्यान कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा अनुभव कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा इस मिनट बस ध्यान कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा सुबह शाम बस ध्यान कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा आसन प्राणायाम कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा अनुभव कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा अवतीत ध्यान कर लो सबकी आत्मा शांति का सागर सबकी आत्मा आनंद का सागर सबकी आत्मा शांति का सागर सबकी आत्मा ज्ञान का सागर सबकी आत्मा ज्ञान का सागर है सबकी आत्मा शक्ति का सागर है सागर है अनुभव कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा इस मिनट बस ध्यान कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा सुबह शाम बस ध्यान कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा आसन प्राणायाम कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा अवतीत ध्यान कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा अनुभव कर लो जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा अवतीत ध्यान कर लो
I lost my background here. Sandeep. Jai Gurudev. Jai Gurudev, Nana. Jai Gurudev. Jai Gurudev, Nana. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev, Mataji, Jai Gurudev to all.
Today is Jayanti. Happy Shani Jayanti. Andarikenu.
Thank you. Same to you, Mataji. Madhavi, we can begin now.
Yes. Jai Gurudev. We welcome you all for the Maharishi Gita Satsang. I would like to request the Maharishi Vedic Pandits to begin with Sahana Vavatu.
जी
Manish.
जी जय गुरुदेव जय गुरुदेव
Jai Gurudev.
ओम सहना भवतु सहनो भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ओम शांति शांति शांति
Now, at the beginning of the session, we will have the Begin Mala, verses 54 and 55 of chapter 2. Only verses 54 and 55.
ओम श्री परमात्मने नमः अर्जुन उवाच शतप्रज्ञस्य का भाषा समाधिस्थस्य केशव स्थितधिः किं प्रभाषेत किमासीत व्रजेत किम् श्रीभगवानुवाच प्रजहाति यदा कामान् सर्वान् पार्थमनोगतान् आत्मन्येवात्मना तुष्टः स्थितप्रज्ञस्तदोच्यते ओम।
Thank you. May I now request Hemaji to recap whatever we have learned in the last session.
Yeah.
Hemaji, please.
Madhavi, can you read English translation of the two last shlokas, please, that Pandits have recited?
Yes, Hemaji. I will.
Yeah, please go ahead.
We just had the recitation of verses 54 and 55. So we will have a short recap in the English version of these two verses. Arjuna said, "What are the signs of a man whose intellect is steady, who is absorbed in the self? O Keshava, how does the man of steady intellect speak? How does he sit? How does he walk?" The blessed Lord Bhagwan Sri Krishna has said, when a man completely casts off all desires that have gone deep into the mind, O Partha, when he is satisfied in the self, through the self alone, then is he said to be of steady intellect.
Okay. So, in the last few verses and in the last session, we have learned that the knowledge from Vedic texts such as Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda, and Jnana Kanda is so vast and diverse that one may get bewildered or even confused because so many people interpret in so many different ways, and their interpretation depends on their level of consciousness, and this may cause confusion. So the solution to that would be to have the experience of the ultimate reality, that is Atma, that is transcendental consciousness. Then you become free from confusion and you become unshaken, because in this state of consciousness where you are unshaken, this is one pointed, resolute state of the intellect. And when this state is never lost in waking, dreaming, or sleep states, then yoga, the skill in action, is achieved. This is called as yoga karmasu kaushalam. So that is important to achieve, then there will not be any confusion. But it is also important to understand that this verse does not undermine the value of Vedic knowledge of karma kanda, etc. Only it emphasizes the importance of experience of samadhi, that is transcendental consciousness, and that one cannot be enlightened just with the intellectual understanding of the Vedic knowledge. You need direct experience of transcendence. And when we experience transcendental consciousness, the goal of all paths is reached. Then everything becomes crystal clear. There's no confusion anymore because you have steadfast intellect, you are steadfast in the self, and you have attained to yoga. So when Sri Krishna Bhagavan says the resolute intellect, the steady intellect, that is Chitta Prajna, then Krishna becomes curious. He wants to know what that Chitta Prajna, that is the resolute intellect, is, steady intellect. So he asks Sri Krishna Bhagavan, he says, Sthita Prajnasya ka bhasha. So to this, Sri Krishna Bhagavan responds, and this question is answered in the next 18 shlokas of the second chapter. These are the last 18 shlokas. We covered one of them last week, and I will recap briefly. In verse 55, this Sthita Prajna state is explained as the state of Samadhi and also Nitya Samadhi. So let us review these words a little bit before we move on. Samadhi is transcendental consciousness. We just talked about that. And nobody should think that only sannyasis will be able to achieve that. It is difficult to get to Samadhi and all that. Maharishi gave us this beautiful, simple technique of transcendental meditation, by practicing which we transcend thought, transcend mantra, and we experience Samadhi. When we experience that silence after transcending, that is Samadhi. And so in that state, there are no thoughts, no desires, because this is a state of no thought, no mantra, because you have gone beyond the thought, beyond the mantra. So this is a state of desirelessness, but you are experiencing only in meditation. Now, when you come out of meditation and you act, and then this silence becomes established in waking, dreaming, sleep states, the silence is with you all the time, then it is called as Nitya Samadhi, that is cosmic consciousness. In this, the mind has transformed into bliss consciousness. And then you experience self as separate from activity. So the desires continue on the surface level, but deep within the mind, there are no desires. And why is that? That is because the mind is transformed into the nature of the self. And all desires have gone to the surface. And prajna, that is the intellect, is anchored to the silence and it becomes immovable. So the Sanskrit word for that is kutastha. It's a very beautiful word. That means immovable, unshakable. How beautiful that feeling would be. You feel solid, immovable, and unshakable inside, in spite of all the activity that is going on the surface. So in that state, deep inside, there are no desires. And that happens also because you are in bliss consciousness. You're satisfied satisfied in the self. You're content. The word that is used in the shloka, it is Atmanyevatmana tushtaha. Means you are happy with your Atma. In Atma, the happiness that is there, you're happy with that and you're content. So you don't care for anything else. You're completely satisfied. So that Atmananda that is inside of you. And when you have that, you don't have to depend on anything outside of yourself, outside in your surroundings. You don't have to depend for your happiness for anything outside of yourself. So that's the state of Sthita Prajna. That's a very beautiful state. So this is what we have studied in the last session. Now we will begin our study with 56, verse 56. Okay, so Sanskrit first and then English, please.
May I request the Vedic Pandits to recite verse 56, please?
जय गुरुदेव जय गुरुदेव दीदी
Jai Gurudev.
कितने
पढ़िए, Mukesh, go ahead.
कितने श्लोक दीदी
Only one, verse
पहले
56.
केवल 56 पढ़ना,
जी
फिर माधवी जब बोलेगी तब 57. अब एक ही 56.
ओम दुःखेष्वनुद्विग्नमग्न सुखेषु विगतस्पृह वीतरागभयक्रोध स्थितिधीर्मुनिरुच्यते. हेलो जय गुरुदेव दीदी.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai.
He whose mind is unshaken in the midst of sorrows, who amongst pleasures is free from longing, from whom attachment, fear, and anger have departed. He is said to be a sage of steady intellect. A sage, Muni, is defined in this verse. Bhagwan Sri Krishna begins to answer Arjuna's questions about the man of steady intellect who quite naturally maintains balance of mind while he continues to act in the field of relative existence. The verse does not provide any signs of an objective nature, but it describes the subjective aspect of a man of steady intellect. Just as a millionaire who has great wealth remains unaffected by the rise and fall of the market, so the wind which has gained the state of, so the mind which has gained the state of bliss consciousness through transcendental meditation remains naturally contented on coming out from the transcendental state to the field of activity. This contentment, being grounded in the very nature of the mind, does not allow the mind to waver and be affected in pleasure or pain, nor allow it to become affected by attachment or fear in the world. This natural equanimity of the mind, even while it is actively engaged, is the state of steady intellect. Sorrows arise in the mind through want of understanding. When one understands only so much and no more of life, lacking vision of the whole span of life, then one feels sorrow. But the man who understands both the unchanging eternal phase of life and unending nature of the ever-changing cycle of life and death will recognize the ephemeral nature of sorrow and not be overwhelmed by it. The feeling of sorrow in the heart, as distinct from the mind, is due to lack of fulfillment, lack of love, lack of happiness. One who practices transcendental meditation experiences the bliss which fills the heart and brings eternal contentment, which leaves no room for any negative emotion, for sorrow, depression, fear, or the like. Neither does it leave room for waves of joy or other positive emotions, because the heart is by nature full and contented. It is like the heart of a grown man remaining unaffected by the toys which create great emotions in the hearts of children. The experience of transcendental consciousness raises a man's consciousness to a level where he finds himself completely separate from all activity, and naturally his values will change. The values of life are different at different levels of evolution. This is why when the normal behavior of a man of steady intellect established on the level of divine consciousness is seen from the ordinary level of human consciousness, it appears different and more than normal, unshaken by pleasure and pain, fear and anger. The basis of such a detached state of life is explained in the following verse. Jai Gurudev. May I request Hemaji to give the comments on this verse?
Okay. So in this shloka, it is saying that the mind that gained bliss consciousness with transcendental meditation comes out of TM with contentment. ध्यान में भावातीत होकर आनंद अनुभव करने के पश्चात मन तृप्त होता है और तृप्त अवस्था में बाहर निकलता है. Then one is not affected by pleasure and pain. तब वो सुख और दुख से प्रभावित नहीं होता है. Just as a crorepati remains unaffected by the rise and fall of the stock market, जैसे एक करोड़पति आदमी शेयर मार्केट में उतार चढ़ाव आने पर भी उससे अप्रभावित रहता है, उसका मन भी भय और राग से अप्रभावित रहता है. So a rich man is not bothered or affected by the rise and fall of the stock market, and also he is not attached to his wealth, and there is no fear of losing money because he has so much money. Even if he loses some, he has a lot more. So it is like that. You have inner happiness, so much happiness and contentment that outer smaller things don't bother you. उसका मन की भी भय और राग से अप्रभावित रहता है. So this is a state of natural equanimity. ये प्राकृतिक समभाव ही स्थित प्रज्ञा की स्थिति है. So why do sorrows come? Sorrows come in the mind because of lack of understanding of two aspects of life: the eternal, never-changing aspect and the transient, ever-changing aspect of life. Once we have this knowledge, we are not overwhelmed by sorrow. तो मन में जीवन के दोनों पहलुओं का, शाश्वत जो कभी नहीं बदलता, हमेशा एक सा रहता है, ये एक पहलू है, और दूसरी है अशाश्वत जो हमेशा बदलता रहता है। तो ये दोनों पहलुओं की समझ न होने पर दुख उत्पन्न होता है। एक बार ज्ञान होने के बाद हम इन दुखों से अप्रभावित रहते हैं। And there is one other point, and that is there is sorrow in the heart because of lack of fulfillment, lack of love, lack of happiness. मन में तृप्ति, प्रेम और आनंद की कमी होने के कारण हृदय में दुख उत्पन्न होता है। So with the transcendental meditation, we experience bliss which fills the heart with love and contentment. तो भावातीत ध्यान के द्वारा हृदय में तृप्ति का भाव आता है और हृदय आनंद से भर जाता है। So when the heart is filled with bliss, there is no room for any negative emotions such as sorrow, depression, or fear. Because heart is full, he stays balanced without getting excited. Just like a grown man doesn't get excited by the toys, like a child who becomes overjoyed when he gets a new toy. So, जैसे कि मैं हिंदी में बोलने की थोड़ा प्रयास कर रही हूँ। जैसे बड़े लोग उत्तेजित नहीं होते हैं, जैसे छोटे बच्चे खिलौनों को देखकर उत्तेजित होते हैं, वैसे बड़े लोग नहीं होते हैं, क्योंकि बड़े लोगों की स्थिति अलग होती है। They stay balanced. But this does not mean that one is like a robot, that they don't have any feelings or happiness or love towards other people. Actually, as a matter of fact, their hearts are full of love and much more loving and caring than ordinary people. Only they stay balanced and unshaken by pleasure and pain and fear and anger. तो संतुलित रहने का मतलब ये नहीं है कि वो मनुष्य रोबोट के तरह हो जाता है, उसमें प्यार की कोई भावना नहीं होती है, ऐसा नहीं है। वास्तव में उनके हृदय सामान्य लोगों से कहीं अधिक प्रेम से भरे हुए हैं। केवल ये सुख, दुख, भय और क्रोध से अविचलित रहते हैं। So now I'll stop and take any questions. You can ask in Hindi or English, either way is fine. So any questions now? No questions? Okay. So, Madhavi, we can move on.
Yes. Sunita, can we have the display of scientific research, please?
Yeah, scientific research.
Yeah. This verse, verified by scientific research, shows that when there has been a test that has been conducted, it showed a lot of self-development in the prison inmates, especially those who were practicing transcendental meditation. This is basically because now, as they regularly practice transcendental meditation, they are trying to be, they're turning themselves inward. That means their stimulus to the external world is slowly reducing. So this has shown that, there has been a lot of emotional stability that has been developed among them, and they are slowly trying to understand their own self. So maybe the regular practice of transcendental meditation has thrown enough dawn on their understanding of how should their response be and their action and behavior. So these things have led towards a self-development. So shall we move on with the verse 57, Hemaji?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Unless there are any questions.
Yes. Once again, if there is anybody who would like to have any queries, you can please, or any questions you have, you can please go ahead. Okay, thank you. May I now request the Vedic Pandits to recite verse 57, only verse 57.
यः सर्वात्मानगसनेहः सत्य प्राप्य स्वभासुभम् नाभिनन्दति नाद्वेष्टि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता ॐ
Jai Gurudev. He who has no undue fondness towards anything, who neither exults nor recoils on gaining what is good or bad, his intellect is established. The man whose mind is established in the unity of bliss consciousness knows by experience that his self is separate from all activity. He acts in the field of relativity, but experience cannot make any deep impression. This is why he naturally remains consistent in his outlook and behavior with others, even while experiencing the diverse nature of the world. Many a commentator upon these verses has introduced the idea that in order to achieve the state of established intellect, one should try to be dispassionate and detached. But in the field of behavior and experience, the strain of attempting to be dispassionate and detached, of trying to make a mood of equanimity in pleasure and pain, only puts unnatural, undue stress on the mind, resulting in the development of an unnatural and warped state of the inner personality. This kind of practice has helped to bring dullness, artificiality, and tension to life in the name of spiritual growth. It has spoiled the brilliance of many a genius in every generation for centuries past. As a consequence, there has grown up in intellect levels of society throughout the world a kind of fear of the spiritual life, which has gone so far that young and energetic people today find even discussion about spiritual practices embarrassing. In his reply to Arjuna's question, Lord Sri Krishna Bhagavan wants to bring home to him that Through the practice of transcendental meditation, the mind becomes infused with divine intelligence and bliss. Thereafter, even while one acts in the world, the state of equanimity is naturally maintained. This verse can never be interpreted in terms of mood making or of controlling the mind in an attempt to live evenness intellectually. It brings out that the man of steady intellect is by nature grounded in non-attachment. Unfortunately, some interpreters have gone so far in misrepresenting the truth of this verse as to disapprove even of enjoying a flower in full bloom or rejecting a faded one. And this way of making life cold and devoid of heart has been recommended as a way of gaining established intellect. What cruelty to life! It is a mistake to copy the behavior of a realized man while remaining in the unrealized state. If a poor man puts up the sign of a wealthy man and tries to behave like one, this can only result in tension. By superficially copying the behavior of a rich man, he cannot possibly become rich. Similarly, the behavior of a man of steady intellect provides no standard for one whose intellect is not steady. If he tries to go that way, his life will become cold, deprived of qualities of heart and mind. This has been the destiny of many a sincere seeker of truth down the ages. Misguided interpretations of verses like this, which are found in almost all scriptures, are responsible for the spiritual plight of innumerable generations. It must not be forgotten that there are two ways of life, that of a householder and that of a recluse. Men from both ways who meditate and arrive at the state of steady intellect will continue in their respective ways of life. The householder, by nature, habituated to the field of activity with all the diversity of phenomenal existence, continues to act in the world, while the recluse continues in his detachment from worldly affairs. The state of steady intellect simply brings them fulfillment. They rise above attachment and detachment, finding their life on the level of eternity, unbounded by any limitation of time, space, and causation, far above the boundaries of any social bond or obligation. Their life is one of cosmic consciousness. They are above the distinction of day and night, waking or sleeping. They are established in the oneness of divine intelligence and bliss. This world of joys and sorrows, of man's great enterprise and ambition, is for them like a world of dolls and toys with which children play and amuse themselves. Toys are a source of great excitement for children, but grown-ups remain untouched by them. The man of established intellect remains even and does not rejoice or recoil on gaining what is good or bad. Has no undue fondness, means is not too emotionally attached. But this does not imply that the man of established intellect is cold and without warmth of heart. On the contrary, he alone is a man of full heart. He is an unbounded ocean of love and happiness. His love and his happiness flow and overflow for everyone in like manner. That is why he has no undue fondness towards anything. it may be stated that the detached and unshakable nature of a man of established intellect described in the previous verse is based on the principle of non-attachment as taught in this verse. Such a non-attachment develops naturally with the growth of awareness of the self as separate from activity. The same natural state of non-attachment is at the basis of activity in the state of steady intellect, even when the senses remain withdrawn from their objects, as shown in the following verse. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev, Hemaji. Mataji, you want me to read the scientific research?
Okay, Nana, go ahead. Are these my two verses, 57 and 58?
No, Mataji.
They are the next.
No, Anita ji, we will have the commentary on verse 57 by Hema ji. Then we request you after the commentary, you please read the scientific research for verse 57.
Okay, Hemaji. Okay,
Thank you,
fine.
Anita ji. May I request Hema ji to kindly comment on verse 57, please?
My verses are 58 and 59, Nana.
Yes,
Right.
Mataji. They are 58 and 59.
But I'm also getting confused.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay. So I will try a different technique for this verse. First, I will explain in English and then in Hindi instead of doing after each point. So that way, I think it will flow more smoothly. So in the previous verse, we just discussed that a man of steady intellect is unshakable and balanced in good and bad situations. And this is based on the principle of non-attachment. Now, it's very important to understand this shloka very carefully because Maharishi said, in the commentary, because such verses are misinterpreted, they caused a lot of confusion in the minds of seekers, which had been producing very bad influence and had been disastrous sometimes. So let us see how we understand this shloka. Maharishi made it very clear that one should not try to be unattached. We don't try. When we try, it is on the surface level. From the level of intellect or thinking, we think, oh, this something bad happened in my life, but I shouldn't react. I should not respond. I should stay balanced. It's not on the level of thinking. It is only on the level of transcendence. This attachment and non-attachment comes when you transcend. Until then, you're not really staying balanced because you're still on that surface level. Because it says in the shloka that one doesn't get excited or feels depressed in good or bad situations. So people think when something, good or bad happens, when something exciting happens, no, I shouldn't feel excited. I shouldn't feel happy. I should just be neutral. No, it's not like that. This kind of thinking doesn't do any good to anyone. It will only increase one's stress. So, how do we get to this balanced state then? Maharishi said, with transcendental meditation, we develop that state of equanimity naturally and maintain it. Because the man of steady intellect is by nature grounded in non-attachment, and that brings them fulfillment. So what is this non-attachment? You go beyond the thought, beyond mental activity, and you experience transcendence. And so you experience yourself, Atma, as separate from activity. And so you're not, whatever is happening in the activity, it is not attached to your experience of silence, of self. So it is separate. So you're not attached to anything in the activity. And because you are established in Atma, the silence of transcendence, you are happy, you are fulfilled. So this is a state of non-attachment, and it comes naturally with transcending in transcendental meditation. And that's when you stay balanced. This is very important to understand. And Maharishi also said in commentary that it is a mistake to copy the behavior of a sthita prajna. Because a man of steady intellect is balanced, somebody who is not in that state should not copy the behavior of that person. He should just do TM, get to the state of transcendence, be non-attached, and then he will have the behavior of a fulfilled person. So just copying will do no good, because if a poor man puts a sign of a rich man, that doesn't do anything. It doesn't make him rich, does it? So it is like that. And also another important point is sthita prajna, that is a man with steady intellect, is not too emotionally attached to anybody or anything. He gives due attention. Due attention means whatever attention you need to give, not more, not less. So giving due attention is the right way of handling your relationship. This is also very important to understand. Now, this does not mean that you cut off your relationship and then you are not attached to them. No, it's not like that. You give how much love and emotion and caring you give. You should do that, but you don't give too much of it. And like in the previous verse we discussed, this doesn't mean that this person who is practicing non-attachment, he's without love or feeling or emotion. Actually, the sthita prajna, a man with steady intellect, his heart is full. He is an unbounded ocean of love, and his happiness flows and overflows for everyone, because he is in transcendence and he experiences that fullness of heart. So that is the meaning of being balanced and being non-attached. So now I will make a few comments in Hindi, because in our last Gita course, we found that it was very helpful, to make comments in Hindi also. So I will summarize this whole thing in Hindi. पिछले श्लोक में कहा गया था कि स्थिर बुद्धि वाला व्यक्ति अच्छी और बुरी परिस्थितियों में स्थिर और संतुलित रहता है, और यह अनासक्ति के सिद्धांत पर आधारित है। इस श्लोक को ध्यान से समझना बहुत जरूरी है। श्लोक में कहा गया है कि स्थित प्रज्ञा बनने के लिए अनासक्त होना चाहिए, कि अच्छी या बुरी स्थिति में वह न तो उत्तेजित होता है और न ही उदास होता है। ऐसी परिस्थिति में रहने की प्रयास करने से किसी का लाभ नहीं होता, इसका बस तनाव ही बढ़ता है। तो ऐसे परिस्थिति में आने की हम सुपरफिशियल लेवल से कोई ट्राइंग नहीं करते हैं। तो हम ये संतुलित स्थिति कैसे प्राप्त करें? ये इसका उत्तर है, भावातीत ध्यान के साथ हम स्वाभाविक रूप से उस समता की स्थिति को विकसित करते हैं और इसे बनाए रखते हैं। क्यों? क्योंकि स्थिर प्रज्ञा, स्टडी इंटेलेक्ट, स्थित प्रज्ञा वाला व्यक्ति स्वभाव से ही अनासक्त होता है। वो स्वाभाविक से होता है, नेचुरली इट हैपेंस, और यह स्थिति उन्हें पूर्ण करती है, उनमें पूर्णता आती है। स्थित प्रज्ञा में व्यक्ति के व्यवहार की नकल करना भूल है। स्थित प्रज्ञा भावनात्मक रूप से किसी जीव से या किसी भी वस्तु से बहुत अधिक जुड़ा हुआ नहीं होता है। वह उचित ध्यान देता है, न अधिक न कम। इसका मतलब ये नहीं होता है कि वह प्यार या भावना या भाव रहित होता है। वास्तव में उसके पास एक परिपूर्ण हृदय है। वह प्रेम का एक असीम सागर है और उसकी खुशी और किसी के लिए प्रवाहित होती है और उमड़ती है। तो वो है स्थित प्रज्ञा। उसके हृदय में पूर्णता होती है और वो सब से प्यार करते हैं, सारे विश्व के प्यार करते हैं। उसको यूनिवर्सल लव बोलते हैं। तो वो बहुत उन्नति स्थायी है। ये है स्थित प्रज्ञा। इसी को जीवन मुक्त भी कहते हैं। ओके, now we'll do scientific research and then take questions.
जय गुरुदेव। हेमा जी ने इतना बताया है हिंदी में, इंग्लिश में, about steady intellect. Now the point here to understand is, when we have understood sthita pragya and we've understood steady intellect, अब हमने इसको साइंस के माध्यम से प्रूव किया है। हमने सिर्फ बोलने से इसको नहीं माना है, क्योंकि महर्षि was always very feeling satisfied that all the Vedic knowledge has been scientifically proven in order to people to understand. So the scientific research of this verse goes like that when you're in a steady intellect, then what happens? Then you become more independent. You start to understand more because you are established in that type of transcendence. Then also there is an increased ability to focus on what is right and wrong, because you are maintaining that steady intellect at the grosser level as well as at the inner level. Now what happens? Then your cognitive flexibility is there. You start a faster reaction to all the informations that you receive, and then you have a very improved vision or comprehension of everything that you go through. There is always a very improved concentration, and your mental clarity and wakefulness is there, because all these qualities are manifested through your steady intellect, through the transcendence, like Hemaji has explained. So a person is able to handle the situation to the best of his ability, through correct comprehension, and he will take the best cognition of the right information that has to be presented. So there is no distortion in such type of a person. Thank you, Jai Gurudev.
Thank you, Anita ji, for a beautiful explanation. Any questions? Hindi or English? So I must have explained nicely in Hindi.
I think you're doing a very great job.
I tried. Okay.
But you're always good at Hindi. You're not like Mataji, you know. I say always the opposite words.
Okay. Should we move on, Madhavi?
Yes, Hemaji. Now, maybe we can have the Sanskrit recitation of verses 58 and 59 together, and also the English reading, so that it is easier for Mataji to comment on both the verses at a time. Is that fine, Mataji?
Yes.
That is very good, Nana.
Yes. I request the Vedic Pandits to recite verses 58 and 59.
Mataji, you would like me to read or somebody else is reading 58 and 59?
Anita ji, you can
No,
read
Yeah.
the verse
I'm-
58.
You can read, Nana.
Sunita will
You read and then you also give the scientific thing you want to give us.
Okay, Mataji.
Okay.
ॐ यदा संहरते चायम् कौर्मोऽङ्गानीव सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणीन्द्रियार्थेभ्यस्तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता विषया विनिवर्तन्ते निराहारस्य देहिनः रसवर्जं रसोऽप्यस्य परं दृष्ट्वा निवर्तते ॐ
And when such a man withdraws his senses from their objects, as a tortoise draws in its lens from all sides, his intellect is established. This verse pictures the state of the senses of a man of established intellect by drawing a comparison with the indrawn lens of a tortoise that form from the outside seems to have no limbs at all. But by this example, Sri Krishna Bhagwan also implies that it is not possible correctly to express the outward signs or distinguishing marks of a man of established intellect. But at least one thing is clear. His senses are drawn in. They are not turned in an outward direction. It may appear that the man of steady intellect referred to in this verse is only he who is in the state of transcendental consciousness, for in this state alone are the senses completely withdrawn from their objects. But withdraws his senses does not necessarily mean that senses do not experience outside objects, as in the state of transcendental consciousness. The senses can be involved with outer experiences and yet not be totally engrossed in them to the extent that they transfer to the mind impressions deep enough to become the seed of future desires. It is very important to understand the verse in this way. Otherwise, the man of steady intellect would have to remain forever outside the domain of sensory activity, which is physically impossible. The established intellect has, in fact, little to do with activity or non activity of the senses. Its basis lies in the natural state of non attachment described in the previous verse. It is plain, therefore, that the present verse refers not to the transcendental consciousness alone, but also to cosmic consciousness, where it is possible for the senses to be in the state of non attachment even while they are active. Sri Krishna Bhagavan is here emphasizing that in the state of established intellect, the senses, being free from attraction towards their objects, remain as though withdrawn from them. When the mind is mainly identified with the inner being, the senses do not identify themselves with their objects. Moreover, the next verse shows when the senses are exposed to the unbounded grandeur of the Supreme, they lose even the taste of their objects. This makes it clear that when the transcendent being fills the mind and begins to be lived on the sensory level, then the intellect is established. This is very different state from mere non-indulgence of the senses, which is certainly no absolute criterion of the established intellect. A man who, because of some circumstance, does not enjoy the objects of the sense may appear to be like an indrawn tortoise, although the mind within may be active, quietly absorbed in the thought of the joys of the senses. Such a state of mind is obviously not the resolute state. It is not established intellect. The principle here brought out does not depend on whether or not the senses are active. It reveals the inner condition of non-attachment on the sensory level in the state of established intellect. And this verse has a very beautiful scientific research which says, withdraws his senses from the objects, and the comparison made with the tortoise, his intellect is established. This shows increased EEG coherence during transcendental meditation, and it also gives us the indication of a unique state of restful alertness. The correlation between neurological efficiency and both high EEG coherence and superior academic performance found in subjects practicing Maharishi Transcendental Meditation and TMCD program. Because here exactly it has been explained how your how you proceed on in that level of established intellect, which has little to do with the activity or non-activities of the senses. So the bases lie in the natural state of non-attachment, and how then they refer that with these qualities, the scientist research says that not only through the transcendental consciousness, but also we are going ahead in cosmic consciousness. Jai Gurudev. Yes, Madhvi, the Pandaji
Sunita,
can read the
Sunita,
Sanskrit.
please go ahead.
The
Sunita, please
Pandaji
go
will
ahead.
read. Will the Pandaji read the Sanskrit?
He read
You
already.
already did.
Sunita ji, it is already done. Sunita will be reading the English part of it now.
मुझे पता भी नहीं चला. The object of the sense turn away from him who does not feed upon them, but the taste for them persists. On seeing the Supreme, even this taste ceases. Taste for them persists means that the mind continues to experience objects through the final level of the senses, in thus distinguishing between the gross and subtle fields of sensory perception. Shri Krishna Bhagavan means to convey that in the state of steady intellect, even the finer faculties of senses remain unattached to objects. This verse presents a challenge to the whole philosophy of control of the senses. It shows clearly that the senses cannot be controlled on their own level. In the field of senses, the senses predominate. They drag the mind towards their objects, towards the joy of the world. None of the objects of the senses, however, is able to satisfy the longing of the mind for happiness. Therefore, the mind is ever found wandering in the field of senses. Only when the state of established intellect is gained and the mind ceases to wander can the senses be controlled. It is wrong to assume that unless the senses are controlled, one cannot realize the truth. As a matter of fact, the converse is true. According to the verse, the senses come under complete control only with the light of realization, only when the transcendental self or being comes to be appreciated on the level of the senses. Wrong interpretations of this and the other verses have led many genuine seekers of truth to undertake rigorous and unnatural practices in order to control the senses, thus wasting their lives and benefiting neither themselves nor others. Mastery of the senses is gained only through the state of established intellect, for in this state, where a man is established in awareness of the self as separate from activity, his behavior is quite naturally unaffected by the otherwise overpowering influence of the senses. At the end of this chapter, Sri Krishna Bhagavan concludes that when the behavior in the sensory field does not in any way disturb the state of established intellect, and the established intellect behaves as a master of the senses, the highest state of human evolution has been reached. On seeing the Supreme, when the intellect goes beyond the field of the three gunas and cognizes the transcendental reality, that it gains transcendental consciousness. When this state of transcendental consciousness is maintained, even while the senses are active, then the situation is created in which transcendent comes to be lived naturally on the level of sensory perception. And when the transcendental comes to be appreciated on the sensory level, then a man is said to have truly gained established intellect. And of this verse, the scientific research says, the object of sense turn away from him who does not feed upon them. But the taste persists on seeing the Supreme, even this taste then ceases. What it means here is that increased experiences of higher states of consciousness. Now we are moving as we proceed because we have seen now there is increased self-sufficiency, there is increased autonomy and independence, increased self-reliance, increased field independence indicated broader comprehension and increased ability to focus attention, because now there is greater inner ability which is based on the control that we are trying to manage through the steady intellect. Jai Gurudev Mataji.
Jai Gurudev Nana. Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. I really don't know. Every time I keep saying, what am I supposed to say? Maharishi has said everything. We go through the same thing again and again. So Hemaji is doing fantastic now. She's gone bilingual and she's giving the translation in both the languages. So as usual, I will always cover the verse before. He has no undue fondness towards anything, who neither rejoices nor recoils on gaining what is good or bad. His intellect is established. Now, we have to this established intellect is what we have to experience within ourselves during this practice of this transcendence, the art of transcendence, and then making it permanent, making this experience of the transcendent permanent when it becomes, the cosmic consciousness. So where the self and the non-self are separate, and for sure that you are the self alone, for sure that you are the self alone, and that everything that is going around and within your own body and within your own physiology is non-self alone. So until this intellect is established, then there is always this rejoicing or recoiling and, suffering or being, happiness and sorrow. This dvandva, the play of the duality continues. And next verse, and 58. And when such a man withdraws his senses from their objects, as a tortoise draws in its limbs from all sides, his intellect is established. Now, you cannot, really withdraw continuously from the objects. Everyone knows that. Because, everyone who says, you have to self-control and you don't expose yourself to the sense, expose the senses to too many objects. And we know that it does not work all the time. Some self-control is needed. Nobody is going to go, completely out and be in the sensual world itself. But just by withdrawing the senses, you cannot really gain this status. So, but again, as the tortoise draws in its limbs from all sides, his intellect is established. That means the senses are being drawn. So the next verse is, the objects of senses turn away from him who does not feed upon them. but the taste for them persists. So if you're not feeding them, if you're not feeding the senses, like you're not listening to the disco music and this and that, you're not eating, too many rich foods, and you're not, being in so much body consciousness, putting on, so many clothes, so much of jewelry, paying so much of attention to how it looks and how it, what it is and all that. And you want to, all the senses, you want to see this and that and enjoy this and that and all those things, even if you're not feeding them. But for taste for them will persist. The taste, when the opportunity comes, you see the gulab jam, automatically you want to eat the gulab jam. And so when the opportunity comes and you want to have something nice, that will you will want it. So the taste will persist. But on seeing the supreme means on knowing yourself, on realizing the self, on seeing the supreme, even the taste ceases. So this is very important to understand here. So when Bhagavan says such a person has no undue fondness, he is an unbounded ocean of love and happiness. So when you don't have the fondness, when you don't have that ultimate, that attraction towards it, then what is left is you are being the self. And the self is, the form and the nature of the self is only bliss, ananda. So the state, here there are two things to be clearly understood. One is the state of non-attachment. And then the second is the study intellect. So the state of non-attachment gets established just because you say, I don't want to be attached to this, I don't want to be attached either to a person, place, or thing, or anything, anything. Because attachment is on so many levels, so many, it's infinite, on infinite levels. So this state of non-attachment, just because you say, I don't want to be attached, it cannot happen. And it can only happen when there is the state of the study intellect. So these two are linked. These two are linked, they are not loose terms here. The non-attachment and the study intellect, both are linked. Now, Bhagavan is emphasizing that in the state of the established intellect, the senses being free from attraction towards their objects remain as though withdrawn from them. So, this is in the state of this established intellect. And when does this happen? When the mind is mainly identified with the inner being or with oneself. Then the senses don't identify themselves with the objects. When this happens, then there is naturally, you are withdrawn from the senses, and then they don't identify themselves with the objects automatically. The senses can be involved without our experience. You don't have to experience them. The senses are all the time bombarded. You are bombarded by the senses because it's a part of you. You're bombarded by them from all sides. Unless, even if you sit in the cave, there are certain senses that are overpowering you. And yet not be fully engrossed in them to the extent that they transfer to the mind impressions deep enough to become the seed of the future desires. This is very important to understand. So, the mind is mainly identified with the inner being. Then the mind does not, the mind is not attracted to the objects, sense objects. Then the senses know that this mind is not interested, and then they keep playing within themselves, and they don't really disturb the mind. And then the sense of established intellect comes. Now the next point is, when the intellect goes beyond the field of the three gunas and cognizes the transcendent reality, which is the self, which is yourself, it gains the transcendental consciousness of the turiya state. Here, the senses come under complete control when the transcendental self or being comes to be appreciated on the level of the senses. That means, the senses now are also experiencing that contentment. They're also not going and chasing the sense objects. They're content. They don't want to be running around and chasing around. They are content and they are at the level of the transcendental consciousness. And here, then we arrive at the blissful source of thought. So the established intellect becomes the master of the senses and not the slave of the senses. Because the mind is not chasing, the senses they're quiet, they're not chasing their objects either. And then the intellect, having experienced the self, now has become the master, and it is not the slave of the senses anymore. So this is how you gain the mastery. Now, I'll take this one step further. In some way, Maharishi has said, during the practice of TM, there is the experience of a thought on progressively subtle levels of the mind until the thought itself is transcended and we arrive at the infinitely settled, blissful source of the thought. The thought itself here should be considered to be a subtler form of sensory perception. This is very important to understand. It is a very subtle form of the sensory perception. And now we can say that we have to transcend through one of the, we are transcending through one of the senses. We are transcending through one of the senses. And Maharishi, in the Science of Being, he says, one, it is possible to transcend actually using any of the five senses, but it is through sound transcending is easiest. So when you're using the senses to transcend, the mind is the one which is ultimately transcending and providing joy and taking you to the field of bliss consciousness, which is Atma or being. I think this is all that we need to know, that, you have to, gaining the established intellect and establishing the non-attachment and gaining the mastery, all of this happens in cosmic consciousness when you know for sure 100% that you are the self alone and you don't lose touch of it in the 24 hours in the waking, dreaming and sleeping. And we know that, even everything else that is playing around in this waking, dreaming and sleeping states is only the non-self and the play of the gunas. When that is known, then everything is established. Thank you so much, Jai Gurudev, Loka Samasta, Sukhino Bhavantu. Any questions? We're all for questions. Don't be non-attached to questions. Okay. So no questions. Hemaji.
Maybe I think during a regular practice of transcendental meditation, two things happen simultaneously.
Yeah.
As you were saying, the subtle differences that we call, or maybe in the colloquial language, the vasanas, whatever we have, the destruction of these vasanas and realization of this that is turning inside happens simultaneously at the same level when we transcend. So that is what is very effective, and that is how we establish ourselves as a sthita prajna.
Yeah, the impressions, the deep impressions start fading. The deep impressions start fading. These are the vasanas and the samskaras. Mostly we call it the vasanas, especially when you have this repeated attraction for the same things, the repeated want and need for the same things. So that those impressions start fading. And ultimately, a stage comes, when the duality ends, then completely they're gone. It's completely erased. But it doesn't mean, that many people think, I remember very clearly when I came to Tirumala, I was surrounded by sannyasis. I actually lived with sannyasis then. And they would say, that you're not supposed to react to anything and you're not supposed to be like this, like this, like this. I heard them, I would not really have a lot of conversations with them. Then I simply asked them one simple question. I said, did you ever see any piece of wood being enlightened? Did you see any piece of rock being enlightened? It doesn't happen that way. And then everything gets so refined, then even this joy and bliss is refined. It becomes, like the Rama's bliss and the Krishna's bliss and the Devi's bliss. So it is actually on a much more expanded level, appreciation of the nature and the creation and the bliss and all that. And there was one question also that came up, that one should not react to pain and one should not react to sorrow and grief. And at that point, I think this is something you should all think of. At that point, I brought up a question to them. I said, do you understand that, Shiva had greatest grief when Sati died, when Sati went through that. And when Sita was abducted, Rama went through the greatest grief. But the only difference is that they even here, just like the bliss is intense, the joy is intense, the appreciation is intense, the grief is also very intense because of this refined nervous system and then whatever it is. But it does not stay that long. It will be a very intense period. You go through it, that emotion, just like you go through the joy and the bliss or whatever it is, the other things, and then it finishes. And that is the difference between the human and the divine. That is the difference between, the normal consciousness and then the heightened God consciousness and the unity consciousness.
And
So,
I would like to make a point here to what you just said, that the
Yeah.
grief doesn't last very long. And the point related to that, what you just now said, is that one is able to handle the difficult situation in a much better way. You have the inner strength to handle the grief in a better way. Instead of collapsing or getting devastated, you have the inner strength of your Atma, inner strength of the self. You are able to handle the situation in a much better way. So that is the biggest advantage, because you are drawing in on the strength from inside. So I think we should stop here. We just have 12 minutes more. Thank you, Mataji, for beautiful comments. And thank you, everybody. Now, I would like to take a quick survey. Was my explaining in Hindi help anybody? Should I try to do that next time for even Mataji's verses or not? Hindi speaking or those who wanted Hindi comment, please unmute and let me know. Unmute, please, and let me know your opinion. Nobody is saying anything. So maybe you can
Let
think
them
about
think about it.
We will do a few minutes. At the end, I will ask again. Madhavi, 5 minutes meditation and then 5 minutes Gita chanting, please.
Yes. So, Jai Gurudev, we will all now just have a short meditation for 5 minutes. Please be seated comfortably and close your eyes. Jai Gurudev. Jai Gurudev. Jai Gurudev. I think only Manish ji is here. Hemaji, shall we have the complete second half of the chapter recitation now?
We don't have time to do the
Time.
whole second half. So Manish ji, द्वितीय अध्याय का पहला श्लोक पढ़ना
जी
और
दीदी।
आखिर के 10 पढ़ना।
जी दीदी। ओम श्री परमात्मने नमः। अथ द्वितीयोऽध्यायः। तं तथा कृपयाविष्टम् अश्रुपूर्णाकुलेक्षणं विषेदन्तमिदं वाक्यम् उवाच मधुसूदनः। ओम तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत् मत्परः वशीः यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः संगस्तेषुपजायते संगात् संजायते कामः कामात् क्रोधोऽभिजायते क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृतिविभ्रमः स्मृतिभ्रंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यते रागद्वेषवियुक्तस्तु विषयानिन्द्रियश्चरन् आत्मवश्यैर्विधेयात्मा प्रसादमधिगच्छति प्रसादे सर्वदुःखानां हानिरस्योपजायते प्रसन्नचेतसो ह्यासु बुद्धि पर्यवतिष्ठते नास्ति बुद्धिर्युक्तस्य न चायुक्तस्य भावना न चाभावयतः शान्तिर्प्रशान्तस्य कुतः सुखम् इन्द्रियाणां हि चरितां यन्मनोनुविधीयते तदस्य हरति प्रज्ञां वायुर्नाविमां वशे तस्माद्यस्य महाबाहो न गृहीतानि सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणेन्द्रियार्थेभ्यस्तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता यानि सा सर्वभूतानां तस्यां जागृति संयमी यस्यां जागृति भूतानि सा निशा पश्यतो मुनेः अपूर्यमाणमचलप्रतिष्ठं समुद्रमापः प्रवसन्ति यतवत् तत्वत् कामायं प्रवसन्ति सर्वे स शान्तिमाप्नोति न कामकामी विहाय कामान्यः सर्वान् उपपाश्च चरति निःस्पृहा निर्ममो निरहङ्कार स शान्तिमधिगच्छति एषः ब्राह्मी स्थितिः पार्थ नैनां प्राप्य विमुह्यते स्थित्वा श्यामन्तकालेऽपि ब्रह्मनिर्वाणमृच्छति। ओम तत्सदिति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुन संवादे सांख्ययोगो नाम द्वितीयोऽध्यायः। ओम श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु। जय गुरुदेव।
जय गुरुदेव। मनीष जी शांति पाठ भी करना।
जी दीदी। हरि ओम माध्यो शांतिरन्तरिक्षगुं शान्तिः पृथिवी शान्तिरापाः शान्तिरोखाधायाः शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्वसवे देवाः शांति ब्रह्मा शांतिः सर्वगं शांतिः शांतिरेव शांतिः सामा शांतिरेधि चतो यतः समीहसे ततो नो अभयं कुरु सन्नाः कुरु परजाभ्यो भयन्नाः पाशवयाः हरिः ओम ओम शांति शांति शांतिः जय गुरुदेव
Jai Gurudev. Thank you, Manish ji. Now all can come on cameras. I see Lakshmi joined. She was in our short Bhagwat Geeta course at Maharishi Bliss Residency. All those who can come on cameras, please come. Bani is here. Jai Gurudev, Bani.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev, Bani. Bela, Jai Gurudev.
जय गुरुदेव मैम।
हिंदी में बताइए, अच्छा लगा?
बहुत अच्छा लगा।
फिर से बोलो। Do you want me to do the same thing next week?
बहुत अच्छा लगा मैम। जय गुरुदेव।
So मैं प्रयत्न करूँ। Lakshmi, so nice to see you. कैसे हो? हाँ, unmute करो. You are on mute, Lakshmi. We couldn't hear what you said.
जय गुरुदेव मैम।
हाँ, जय गुरुदेव।
कैसी हो?
हाँ, बोलो।
आप कैसी हो?
मैं अच्छी हूँ।
थैंक यू मैम।
You're welcome. So, any comments from anybody? Otherwise, we can close.
Can you speak Hindi?
Yeah. हिंदी में बोलो। मैं भी बोल रही हूँ ना। हाँ। लक्ष्मी, कुछ बोलना चाहते हो?
नो मैम, अभी क्वेश्चन नहीं है।
अच्छा, ठीक है। Okay, thank you all for joining. We'll meet again next Friday, same time. Jai Gurudev.
जय गुरुदेव
Jai Gurudev.
जय गुरुदेव।
Jai Gurudev.
जय गुरुदेव
Jai Gurudev, Sunita. Thank you.
थैंक यू
Bye.